Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon at our apprenticeship clinic on top tips for interview. My name is Ruth Harper. I'm the Partnerships Development Manager at Workplus. Before I joined Workplus, I actually worked in HR for many years in a hotel, interviewing for lots of different roles at lots of different levels for many different hotel departments. After that, I worked for an education charity for many years. Don't want to say how many, but I actually ran interview skills classes just like the one I'm going to share with you today. So I really do hope you find it helpful and you leave feeling even more confident for any future interviews you're going to attend. Just to let you know what's going to happen this afternoon, shortly we'll be hearing from Lucy from Workplus, who's going to give us a little bit of an update of where we are in the Workplus apprenticeship campaign and what you can expect over the next month or so. I'm then going to share some insights from our Workplus employers in terms of how they run their interviews and what they expect. Next, we're going to hear from Katie Embleton about her experience of interviews when looking for her apprenticeship. We'll hear then from the other side of the table. We'll hear from Jenny Ors, who's the People and Culture Generalist from 3173, and she's going to be sharing her experience as an interviewer. Then we're going to talk about what's important to consider before, during, and after interviews, and I'll just recap and share some of the top tips for those different stages. Then finishing off, you'll have the opportunity to ask us some questions that you might have, and you'll be able to do that through the Q&A function of this webinar. So if you do think of questions, please feel free to pop them in that Q&A box and we will answer them and we'll come to them at the end of today's webinar. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand over to Lucy, who's going to remind us where we are in the Workplus timeline and some of the activity that will happen in the next month or so. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Everyone, it's great to be with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, you've applied to Workplus for an apprenticeship opportunity, and it's been really hard for you probably to wait and to think about what employers might get in touch about. So I just want to remind you about where you can find lots of information about this apprenticeship campaign that we've just seen the deadline of for applications last month. So the next couple of slides just remind you where you can find this information. If you go to Apprenticeships on our website, when you click Career Explorers, you'll then be taken to our page, which tells you about where you can find information on this campaign. So on the next slide, if you click through, you'll be able to see, find out more, and then see the timeline for this campaign. So to walk through the timeline, hopefully you're familiar with all these dates already. But as you know, you completed your application by the 21st of February, and then employers began the behind the scenes shortlisting. So this was the time when employers were reading your application and they were considering whether or not they'd like to invite you for interview. Now, employers from yesterday will have been reaching out to invite applicants for interviews. But do bear in mind that each employer has a different busy timetable for their week, and so it might be a few days before you hear from an employer. We're also working really hard to get more employers to create new opportunities, and that means that there could be employers that access your application later on in the next weeks. But it's unlikely if you don't hear from an employer by the 31st of March, it's unlikely that you'll be invited for interview. And that's because on the 31st of March, employers will start to make offers to those that they've interviewed. This is the earliest date that you'll get an offer made to you. But there could be, in the weeks following that, more offers made. For example, we know that TransLink won't be making any offers until the 14th of April. So they're a couple weeks later if you've applied to TransLink's opportunities. Maybe you're joining this webinar and you've already heard that you've been invited to interview. Well done, very well done. We had almost 1,300 applicants for different apprenticeship opportunities. It's been incredibly competitive. And so if you haven't yet heard, please don't take that to heart. We do run later campaigns in the year, so we'll open applications again in August. We might open them before August. So you can check back then, make an application. You've already done a lot of hard work on your profile, so you might want to update your profile then in a new campaign, or you can just make a new application when applications open again. Maybe as well, you've already been checking your emails frequently, or been checking your phone to see if you're getting invited to interview. Just a note to remember to check your spam or your junk mail. Sometimes employers, when they're inviting you to interview, use an automated system, and so that can easily go into your spam or your junk mail folders. So please make sure to check there, because um, you don't want to miss an invite. When employers reach out to you to invite you for interview, please get back to them as soon as possible. We know some of you may be in school and it may be hard to have access to your phones. That's okay, but just make sure that you get back to the employer as soon as possible. Remind yourself of the employers that you applied to so that you recognize their names and you recognize the job title that they are reaching out to you about. And remember that they'll be in touch with you via the email that was on your application, the same email that you used to log into your Workplus account, or via your phone number that you provided on the application. Um, you may have noticed already that your Workplus dashboard will provide you with some updates as well throughout the next few weeks when we go through the shortlisting phase, interview stage, and then offers made stage. But those notifications are not a guarantee of anything. They're there to try and give you some feedback where we can, but different employers shortlist in different ways. And so if you've been shortlisted, it's not a guarantee that you're invited for interview. Some employers shortlist over 100 applicants that they receive, and then they do further siftings after that initial sift. So don't take those notifications to be the ultimate truth. Do just keep checking your emails and phone, because if you're invited to interview, that employer will hear or will reach out to you directly. So do keep a note about that. Um, if you've received an interview invite already, very well done. Well done for getting to that stage. But please do think carefully about whether or not that apprenticeship is the right choice for you. Employers are incredibly busy. They're taking really precious time out of their weeks to interview applicants. And so we want to make sure that our employers are interviewing with confidence, and employers don't want to interview you and then you maybe change your mind and decide that it's not right for you. And while we think it's good for you to keep your options open, especially if you're in your last year of school, things can change so quickly. Please do think carefully about whether an apprenticeship is your first choice. And I know that maybe we'll be hearing from Katie on this later about her own journey as well. So things can change, things can change last minute as well, but please do respect the time of the employers that are making interviews, and think carefully about whether you're ready for work, ready for working and studying at the same time, and whether that apprenticeship is your first choice and one that you seriously want to consider. But we also do hear from apprentices who maybe get an interview invite for an apprenticeship that wasn't their first choice apprenticeship, and then their mind changed after the interview, so it can open doors too. On your Workplus dashboard, just a reminder that you can download your application. Remember that these employers are interviewing lots of applicants, and so you'll want to familiarise yourself with what you talked about in your application, as well as doing research on the company that you apply to. But just a reminder that you can download your application. Um, when you get to the interview stage, you'll probably be asked by the employer about your application to the course, to the training provider. So the next slide will show that, just as a reminder, that for an apprenticeship, you need your job opportunity and you also need to apply to the training provider. So that's a university or college. So do make sure that you have made that application. For Ulster University, you don't make that application until you've received a job offer, so you can hold off if you're applying to a HLA course at Ulster University. But do be aware of which course you're planning to apply to. The employer might talk to you as well about their preferences. Will have attached a course to the job opportunity that you were applying to on Workplus. So remember about that stage. And then if you receive an offer from the 31st of March, you'll just be waiting to get a contract from your employer, as well as waiting to hear about the start date of your apprenticeship. Some apprentices start in maybe June, July time before their apprenticeship course begins in September, just so that they can ease themselves into work and get going, get used to the transition of work. But other apprentices don't start until September, October time when their apprenticeship course starts. So it's up to you and the employer when you might want to start. Just keep in touch with the employer about that at interview stage. Um, but that is, yeah, all for me for now, about the process. Remember, a lot of that information can be found on our website. And if you have any questions, about the process, you can drop them into the Q&A function on the Zoom call, or we also can be contacted through our website. Thanks, Ruth.
Great, thanks so much, Lucy. Okay, so let's dive in to see what we can expect in an interview. But before I do that, I want to do a very quick poll question, which hopefully Lucy will be able to bring onto your screens. I just want to know, in our audience out there, what experience have you had with interviews? So you'll have three options. You'll have none, a formal chat, or at least one formal interview. So I'm going to ask Lucy to put the poll up. And if you can see the poll, can you please select your answer, whether or not you have had no interview at all, just an informal chat, or you've had a formal interview. So if you please vote now. Lucy, can you see the results of that poll?
Yes, I can see the results here. So we have about 40% who have had at least one formal interview.
Okay.
38% have had an informal chat, and then 23% have had no experience with interviews.
Okay, so a bit of a range in the audience there. Great, thank you so much, Lizzie. So let me just share my screen again, and we will go through what to expect then. So for those of you who have had no experience of interviews, we're just going to share a little bit of an insight from Workplus employers about how they run their interviews and what they look for. Now, this does come with a warning. These results don't necessarily reflect all the employers on the Workplus campaign who are recruiting apprentices. Only a selection replied to our survey, so please don't base everything you expect to happen in relation to your interviews on the results that I'm going to share with you. No employer will do exactly the same thing, but it will give you a bit of a general idea of what to expect. Okay, so just for those who have had no formal interviews before, I'm going to start off by letting you know what you can expect when you get that invite to interview. I know this is very basic, but just to put your mind at rest. You will get the time and the place. Most employers will even let you know how long that interview is going to last, including directions to the building. If you're worried about what to do whenever you come in, even 50% will tell you that much. They'll tell you what to do on arrival in the building. Also, if there's anything you need to prepare beforehand, most employers will let you know that as well, and they'll tell you who will be on the panel. So rest assured, basic information that you'll need to know about your interview will be included in the invite. Okay, gonna do another quick poll just to make sure you're still with me. Lissy, if you wouldn't mind sharing the poll, how many seconds does it take to make a good first impression? Okay, so I want you just very quickly to decide that. So you've got your invite. We're going to think about your first impressions now. And Lucy, again, if you wouldn't mind sharing the results of that with me. Oh, I can actually see them. Okay, great. Oh, 44% of you know where it's at. So 44% of you are saying 7%, 31 are saying 10, 13, and then 6 are saying a minute. Great. Thanks for filling that in. Well, nearly half of you were correct. It is 7 seconds. So 7 seconds to make a good first impression. So as you can imagine, you won't have said much in 7 seconds. So that includes your body language, your eye contact, your confidence, and how you dress, how you appear will all make an impact in those first few seconds. So to make sure that you're starting off your interview well. Um, just make sure that you have that in your mind about making a good first impression. Just a personal story. I remember my first interview, my first ever formal interview. I was sitting and the interviews were running a wee bit behind, and I decided to take my phone out and I was just scrolling on social media waiting for the interviewer to come out. So engrossed in my phone, didn't actually realize the interview had come out until she was basically in front of me. I was so nervous, felt like I was silly for being on my phone, dropped my phone. She said, "Sorry, Ruth, I think you've dropped your phone there." And it was such an awkward first meeting, such an awkward start to an interview. And I don't think I made a very good first impression. So, my advice from personal experience is keep your phone in your bag. Don't, while you're waiting, don't be tempted to bring it out and start scrolling. If you can, if maybe someone's giving you a lift, I would even say put your phone in the car, because the last thing you want to do in an interview is be sitting there thinking, did I turn my sound off? What have I done? Is my phone going to go off while I'm sitting here? So keep your phone in your bag or keep it in the car. While you're waiting, just stay alert, be ready to stand up, be ready to be confident and smile when that interviewer approaches you to bring you to the interview, and even shake their hand if they offer their hand to reach out to shake yours. Some of you may be already thinking, well, then what do I wear to make a good first impression? Just to let you know what our employer said, some expected you to be formal slash casual. Some even said formal, and I would consider that to be smart, to be smartly dressed. What does that look like? Maybe chinos, darker jeans, maybe a shirt or something like that. What it's not is tracksuit bottoms, sports tops, jeans with rips in them, most trainers. If in doubt, I would say go more smart than casual. I don't think you'll ever regret walking into an interview dressed smart, but you may regret if you go very casual and you walk in and all your interview panelists are in suits. But please don't feel under pressure. What I'm not saying is go out and buy something new. Don't feel under pressure to do that. Simply wear the smartest thing you have. Of course, you want to make a good first impression. We all know that. But employers are not going to base the job offer on how you're dressed. That will come down solely on your interview and if the employer thinks your skills and qualities are a good fit for their organization. The next set of results actually surprised us. So it said there's nearly a 50-50 split, or whether or not you're going to be online in your interviews or in person in your interviews. I don't know what you think about that. That might be a relief to some of you, maybe not. I don't know what you think about online interviews, but I would say if it is online, employers will expect your camera to be turned on. I mentioned about dress making a first impression. If it is online, where you do the interview can also leave a lasting impression. You don't want to leave the employers not really remembering you, but remembering your messy back bedroom in the background. Or I've been in meetings before where I've been totally distracted by not just one, not just two, but three cats in the background and a dog running around somewhere. You don't want people to remember what was going on in your background and not be listening to the answers that you're given in your interview because they're totally distracted by that. So try to think of somewhere where you can set up your camera and your computer with a plainish background, or make sure you blur your background, or like we have, you could upload a background picture to cover up what's behind you. And just one last thing about online interviews, just be conscious of where you're choosing. Just make sure that it's somewhere with a strong internet signal, because the last thing you want to do is maybe freeze or lose signal while you're going through your interview. So what about the panel then? How many can you expect on your interview panel? Well, typically 2 to 3 people, and that's made up usually of someone from HR, a team leader, or a person who will be the head of department that is hiring the apprentice. And what I would say here is, from my point of view, from someone who have sat on many, many interview panels and interviewed many, many people, genuinely, the interviewers are looking forward to meeting you. They want to find someone who is the best fit for that job. They are not there to be harsh, they're not there to be mean, and they're not there to be judgmental. They are simply going to ask you some questions so they can find out more about you, see what your personality is like, and most of all, see if you would be a good fit for their organization. What can you expect from the interview process then? Well, for most, it will be a straightforward question and answer or an informal chat. And really, the purpose of this is to find out more about you, let your personality shine through. For those of you who are maybe seeing that there's problem solving tasks on the screen and maybe you're starting to get a little bit worried about that, don't worry. Jenny from 3173 is going to talk us through what that might look like. And for the skills assessment, Lucy's already mentioned TransLink. TransLink are the employer that does the skills assessment, and they have assured me that they will tell you all about that whenever they actually invite you to interview. So it's not that you're going to turn up and find anything unexpected. For those who do have skills assessments, it's nothing to worry about. I did a skills assessment for the job that I'm currently in. I actually quite enjoyed it. It's simply to find out if you are the right fit for the job. And they're actually really helpful because if you don't have the right skills or personality for the job, you'd be absolutely miserable in it anyway. And you wouldn't want to be stuck in a job that's not right for you. So a skills assessment is a really helpful way to show you if you're the best fit for that organization. So just to give you an idea of what questions you can expect to be asked, you will most definitely be asked to tell a little bit about yourself. And that is an answer you can practice. And you might be sitting there thinking, what do I need to practice that about? I know myself. But I have a friend who was going for an accountancy interview. She had practiced all the technical answers that she could think of and was a little bit nervous. And when they asked her the first question of tell me about yourself, she completely froze and couldn't think about one thing about herself. So I would encourage you, even it sounds simple, but even practice the answer to this question and think about the job that you're applying for. Can you even relate the job to some of your hobbies? For example, if you're going for a job that you're maybe dealing with customers in, you want to talk about the fact that you're social and you enjoy meeting people. Employers aren't looking for an answer like, oh, I live in Belfast and I go to such and such a school. They're looking for an insight into your personality. And if you can match the parts of your answer that relate to the job or the apprenticeship, that's even better. You can expect to be asked about why you applied for this position. Here, employers are really looking for enthusiasm about the job and also about the company. So you might want to talk about your interest in industry and why you think you would be a good fit for the job. Answers employers won't be impressed with are ones like, I don't really know, I'm just kind of keeping my options open. That won't set you apart compared to someone else who maybe in another interview has showed real enthusiasm for the job and for the company. If an employer asks if you've applied to full-time uni, it's okay to tell them the truth. But this interview is for the employer to suss out if you're passionate about the route or this industry. So I would encourage you to make sure that shines through. It's okay to have applied to full-time university. It's okay to tell the truth about that, but make sure you show passion about the apprenticeship, as Lucy has already alluded to earlier. Before you go for an interview, we would advise that you research the company, as most will ask you that question. As I mentioned, I used to work for a hotel, and I will never forget asking this question to an interviewee. She clearly panicked, had no research on the company, must have spotted a plant behind my head because her answer was when I asked her what does she know about the hotel, she said, I know you have plants, and that was it. So the type of answer I was looking for was, I know you're a hotel chain. I know you have 5 other hotels in Northern Ireland. This hotel is 5-star. You're very popular for weddings and have conference facilities. Basic information that a quick website search could have found. It doesn't have to be an in-depth speech about the company, but you should be able to say something to demonstrate that you've done your research. Some employers might also ask about your weaknesses or your negative characteristics, and this can be a bit of a tricky question to answer because what you don't want to do is make yourself sound completely unemployable. So answers like, I'm a terrible timekeeper and I never make it to anything on time, or I'm really disorganized. None of those are great answers, but you can show your self-awareness as well as being honest with this question. An answer that I always give is that my spelling and grammar isn't the strongest, but I always use spell checker. I ask someone to check my work if it's going out to the public, and I've even downloaded extra software to help me with my grammar and spelling. Um, you could answer something like you're a perfectionist and you work really hard to make sure that you do a good job, even if it means staying late and putting in extra hours. Trying to bring self-awareness, but also put a positive spin on it, is what employers are looking for with this answer. You'll see on the screen there that there's also situational based questions. So let's spend a little minute thinking about those. Some of these may look familiar to you as part of the Workplus application process. And one reason we ask them is to give the employer a little bit of insight into your personality and how you deal with situations. And these are the types of questions that could also be repeated and asked during your interview. And there is a skill to answering them. Some of you may know already, but just very quickly, I'm going to talk about the STAR technique. And it's a very simple way of ensuring that you're answering the full question. So let's take this question, for example. Let's say employers are going to give you marks out of 10 for your answer to this question. Can you give me an example of when you had to manage your time and what techniques you used? So I'm going to give you an answer and I want you to give me marks out of 10 for my answer. Lucy's going to put another poll on the screen. So my answer is I was working at work for my uncle sometimes, and it can be really busy, and I always have loads of jobs to do. So that's the answer. So what would you give me out of 10 for that question, for that answer? Okay, so okay, some generous person out there is going to give me 68. Thank you for that. Most people are saying between 1 and 3, and you're absolutely right. It was very vague. No details were given, and I didn't set the scene at all. The most that you could give me is 5, because I don't know if you noticed, but it's actually 2 questions. So can you give me an example of when you had to manage your time and what techniques you use? So it's actually 2 questions, and just be aware of that whenever you're being asked questions in your interview. Sometimes there's more than one question. So the STAR technique can help you with these types of questions. And STAR stands for situation, so set the scene. Task, what was the issue or the task? Action, what did you do? Result, what was the outcome? And it just means you can answer the question fully without leaving out any details. So let's look at an example of how I could have answered this question better using the STAR technique. So, situation. The situation was I was working for my uncle. He owns a clothes shop and I work there on a Saturday. It was extremely busy, and last week a delivery had come in of new clothes and they needed to be put out on the shop floor. There was also clothes in the changing rooms that needed to be put back out, and someone had spilled juice near the tills. I prioritised what was the most important thing to do, so I cleaned up the spillage to make sure that nobody slipped and hurt themselves. I decided that the delivery could wait till after the shop was closed, so I made sure the changing rooms were clear and any clothes lying about were put back on the shelves so customers could see the stock and the sizes. The result was that nobody had any accidents from slipping on the juice. The changing rooms were clear for customers, and they got a better range of sizes available for them to try on. And putting the delivery out after the shop closed took half the time, and there was no interruptions from the customers. So hopefully you'll see how much of a better answer this is and how much more detail it gives the interviewers. It really sets the scene and shows the actions that you took. They can also see the technique that was used. In what I used was prioritizing to help manage my time because there was lots of tasks to do. So you could also use an example like your last exams whenever you were doing your GCSEs and you had lots of time pressure, and maybe you also had a part-time job and the amount of revision you had to get through. And a technique that you can use as an example might be a study timetable or to-do lists with deadlines. And it's okay to go through the STAR technique in your head and even verbally to keep you on track. It's okay to use words like the situation is, or the task I then did was, the action I took was, or sorry, the task that I had was, the action I did was, and the result was. And you can actually use the STAR technique to help you answer and keep you on track. Okay, so you've gone through your interview, you've answered all your questions, and at the very end of closing up the interview, you will actually be given the opportunity to ask some questions yourself. So here's an idea of the questions that the employer likes to see. And you may notice that the majority of them, if not all of them, are actually related to the job or the role. So again, this is something that you can have a wee think beforehand. What are you going to ask the interview about the job or the role? And the research you've done might even help you to think of some questions. So you can go into your interview armed with a question that you can ask. And just lastly, something to flag, your first interview may not be your last one. Some organisations will do second interviews, particularly if the first round of interviews, the candidates have been really strong and they want a second interview to help them make their final decision. Some employers may even ring you before an interview for an informal chat, and sometimes they might ask you questions to find out if you're really serious about this position and even if you're willing to travel if you were to get the job. And they will actually use that as a basis to decide if they're going to invite you for interview. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of an insight into the interview process and what to expect. As mentioned, not all employers that are going to be interviewing in this campaign filled out the survey, but it should give you some insight into the common things that happen at interviews. Okay, so that's enough for me from now. It's now time to talk to someone who's been through the whole process and now even does interviews herself. I am going to hand over to Lucy, who is going to have a little bit of a chat with Katie to find out about her interview experience. Over to you, Lucy.
Super. Thank you so much, Ruth. That was really helpful. I'm delighted to be joined by Katie, and I'm just going to ask Katie a few questions about how she went about the interview process a few years ago when she applied through Workplus and she is now an apprentice. So, Katie, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your apprenticeship?
Yeah, that's no problem. Hi, everybody. My name's Kitty Embleton, and I'm an apprentice civil engineer at ACOM. I applied through the Workplus apprenticeship scheme about 5 years ago, where I applied and everyone read application, and I had a number of interviews. It wasn't as popular back then, and now it is quite popular. So don't be too disheartened if you don't get lots of interviews, because obviously there's so many people applying. But basically, I'm on my 5th year in university. So I did the foundation degree at Belfast Met in civil engineering, and now I'm in my final semester, and then that's kind of it. So
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie. So you've applied through Workplace, you applied to several different opportunities. Do you want to tell people listening a bit about what might have helped you decide that an apprenticeship was right for you? Particularly for people who've applied and they're maybe not sure if an apprenticeship's right for them, they're keeping their options open. What would you say to them to help them decide if an apprenticeship is right for them?
yeah, so one of the first things I would say would be, what do you enjoy doing at school? What subjects do you enjoy most? What bores you? Don't do something that you don't like. Um, if you're in, like for me, when I was in school, I did maths, ICT, and technology and design, which then led me on to wanting to do something on the computer, and wanting to do design work and things like that because I love technology. So I would say focus on what you enjoy, and what you're good at as well. And another thing I would also say is, do you like to problem solve? Do you want to work in an office? Are you willing to work alongside professionals for the rest of your apprenticeship? And as well as that, are you dedicated and are you determined? Do you want to? It is a lot. It is a lot to have to go through, working full time and studying. And if you're dedicated, it's very definitely worth it. I love it. But I would say you have to keep sticking at it.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
brilliant advice there, Katie, and great questions to be asking because it's hard to make those next steps. And sometimes, and particularly if you're in school, it's hard to think what might be suited to you. So Katie, when you applied, you had a number of interviews with different employers and Workplus. Civil engineering is always a popular opportunity for employers to use as a pathway, a popular apprenticeship. Were your interviews all the same? Can you tell us about how many interviews you had and what they were like?
I had a number of interviews and each of them did vary. And I noticed that some of the questions that were asked, so generally for me at the time, there was questions directly asked face to face. It was for me anyway. It might be online, but there'd be a couple of people asking you a question. And then there was also group tasks as well. So I would just kind of say for me what I took out of it. So the group tasks, I wouldn't be too nervous or anything about it or think too much into it. But it's basically they want to see how you work with people and how you work as a team and how you listen to what other people are saying in the group and how you feedback and contribute. I would also say don't talk over people and don't say, oh, my opinion, give your opinion, say my opinion's right, take all that on board. And then how you can compromise and come to an agreement if your opinion's not the same as somebody else's and you can like meet in between. And then for individual questions that I was asked, I'd say they'd ask like how your hobbies and interests are, why you're interested in the apprenticeship, how did you find out about it? Do you know what the job role that you're asked? Do you know what job role you're applying for? And do you know what you kind of strive to be? And another thing would be, have you got knowledge about the industry? Do you know what, you know, civil engineering projects there are, for example, online? And another thing I would say would be if you research about the company that you're applying for, and have a look online and see what projects that they've been involved in. So, for example, ACOM, if you're applying for ACOM, an example of a project you could say about is the Dundonald International Ice Pool that's being refurbished,
Mm.
or a greenway scheme that they're involved in as well. So there's multiple different things that you can look up on, and that obviously makes them go, oh, they've read and they know what they're talking about, and they're not just applying for no reason. So that's what I would say. My experience was on that.
Brilliant. Yes. So yeah, there's so much that you can find out online. There's so much that is available to you research wise to come across and make a good impression. Is there anything that you think you did before interviews that really helped? You've obviously, yeah, looked up online about projects for the companies you're applying to, but were there any other tips that you have of what you did before the interviews that helped you prepare?
Yeah, so I would say I wrote out a few questions that I thought that I could be asked, and even writing in bullet points, what you want to say so that you can remember them in your head. And then also maybe ask your family or your friends what they think that you might be asked. And then think there's might be some questions that you might not have thought of before. And you'll be, oh, I don't know how to answer that. And then it gives you that chance. And also, you know, speak out loud and say what you think your answer might be, and ask your parents, else do you think I should say? Or your family. That would definitely be one. Also, as I said before, just read up about the company and about the role you're applying for, like what their values are. Are they are they a worldwide company, or is it a smaller company that's only within Northern Ireland or the UK, and things like that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie. So hindsight is a wonderful thing. You completed your interviews a few years ago. If you're looking back, is there anything that you think you could have done better, wish you did differently? So many to prepare for, and it's hard when it's particularly tight timelines between each interview, or they're all maybe in a similar week, the same week. Do you have any tips on what you think you might have done differently?
Yeah, I would say don't overthink it. If you've missed out something that you thought you should have said, and you've gone away from the interview, don't overthink it. Just it is what it is. You can't change it, and you've given the impression that you can, the best impression that you can. But another thing I would say was, if someone asks you a question in the interview and you can't think on the top of your head, the one that you have in your head, just try and go through that and say what you want to say. And then if you go on to another question, for example, and then you remember what you want to say, and if it's very important, just say, would you mind if I could elaborate on the last question? Because if you don't say it, then they'll never know, and then it means, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
that's one thing that I would say is just don't stop yourself from saying what you want to say.
Mm.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kitty. And last question. So you applied to a few different apprenticeships and you got several different interviews, and then you managed to get a few different offers for apprenticeship jobs, which is brilliant. So apprenticeships are now growingly more competitive, increasingly more competitive. But what helped you make your decision about which job to accept, which offer to take?
So for me, I was very really wanted to have a company that is a worldwide company. It's a bit more of a global company that had apprentices already there. So that I could speak with other apprentices and kind of get that experience. I wasn't the first kind of person. As well as that, I did my work experience with ACOM when I was in school. So I kind of got the vibe that I really wanted to do that as well. So that's kind of made and I've read up about it and read about all the different projects that are involved in and things like that. So for me, ACOM was a no-brainer. It was my last interview, and I was hoping that I had got it. So yeah, that's what made my decision.
Brilliant. Super. Thank you so much for all your advice and all the best for the rest of your apprenticeship. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katie and Lucy. That was great. Really great advice there, Katie. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Jenny. Jenny, you can give us some insight into what it's like to be at that other side of the interview table. But first of all, do you want to introduce yourself, Jenny, and give a little bit of an introduction to your company and your role?
Of course. So hi, Ruth, and everybody who's joined us today. So I'm Jenny, and I work at 3173 in resourcing and recruitment, which is part of our people and culture team. Just a little bit about our company. So 3173 is our parent company, and it's made up of three companies who all specialize within different areas of pensions. So this includes Spence and Partners, who specialize in pensions and pension consultancy, including actuarial. Dalriada, who specialise in running pension schemes throughout the UK, and Mantle, who are our newest area of the business, and they specialise in developing high-end pension software. So we've got a lot going on, which is really exciting. And we currently operate across the UK and Ireland and have growth plans mainly within Mantle to expand into the US market. So that's a fun time for all of the Mantle team. We've offices all across the UK in key locations. And actually, it's good to know, I think, being from Belfast, that Belfast is our main central office. So it's our kind of key location. And across the UK, we've around about 300 team members, and we're continuing to grow. So it's a great time to come on board.
Brilliant, Jenny. Yeah, exciting time
Yeah,
for
very much
everybody
so.
then.
I know, very
Great.
much so.
And we had shared a little bit about what employers do, and group assessments has come up. Can you
Yeah.
give any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is we sometimes, not always, so don't be too worried, choose to use the group assessments as part of our hiring process. And the group assessments bring I guess bring a different angle to recruitment. These allow us to see how different people work together in groups in different situations. So we would observe the participants' interactions, things such as communication skills, people's ability to work together, work as part of a team. Now, in the past, these types of sessions that I've been involved in different companies as well, have included, lots of different things, sometimes really fun things like maybe jigsaw building together, kite making an egg fly without cracking it, like problem solving tasks, maybe related to specific projects, etc. And so in general, they are usually a group task. As I say, we observe different behaviors during these sessions, and maybe things like who takes the lead, who sits back and watches others do all the work, who thinks methodically, who listens well. There's not always one specific thing that we're looking for. It's just different, like a broad range of skills. My top tip in these scenarios is always make sure you get involved and always make sure you listen to others. So when you're presented with these tasks, try and avoid sitting back and doing nothing, get involved.
Brilliant. And I'm sure what Katie said applies there as well. Just be yourself and
Be
don't
yourself,
overthink it.
always. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And we're going to go on to top tips for interview next. But what do you, as an interviewer, Jenny, what do you look for in a good interview?
So for me, it's always really important that an interview is somebody who can tell a good story without oversharing, giving good solid examples and demonstrate their knowledge and experience, and really allowing us to visualize them as part of our team. That's so important for me. Somebody who I can walk away from, and the examples they've given me make me really understand and, as I say, visualize how they've performed a certain task or carried out a certain job.
Brilliant. So using the STAR technique then really
Yeah, of course.
sort
I mean, the STAR technique is a brilliant guide, I think, particularly for new people who are taking on interviews.
Brilliant. Okay, so I suppose the flip side of that, I've sort of shared a wee bit from my experience. Does any interviews stand out to you as being particularly bad? Or if you maybe don't want to share that, is there any advice about what definitely not to do in an interview?
Yeah. Okay, no, it's a tricky one. So I don't really, I try not to think about maybe people who haven't had a not so great interview, because I do understand and appreciate that interviews can be daunting for lots of people for lots of different reasons. So, and actually, I think culturally, sometimes, particularly in Northern Ireland, we're not always great at speaking positively about ourselves and bigging ourselves up. So that can be a challenge. Advice from me would be keep the story and examples about you and your achievements, what you've been part of and what you've experienced. Avoid speaking negatively of anybody else, whether that be an ex-colleague or classmate or maybe a teacher that you didn't get on great with, or telling a future employer how much you disliked your previous job, things to avoid. A lot of people have had maybe not so great experiences, but they are experiences, we've all taken something from them. So just try and keep it positive, would be my advice and tip.
Oh, that's brilliant, yeah. And I guess we touched on how to make a good first impression as well. Do you get any advice around that?
I mean, so you did a very good job of covering that. I suppose, as the saying goes, you never get a second chance to form a first impression, do you? So, for me, good first impressions are things like being punctual, good presentation, and look like you're genuinely pleased and happy to be there. You've been chosen to be there. That itself is actually a really positive step, because some people don't even get invited to an interview. So, it's a big tick. If the interview's virtual, I know we've touched on it, make sure the background doesn't show a bedroom, etc. And I'm now going to turn around and make sure I'm not showing a messy living room or bedroom. So just things like that might distract from the conversation. It's common for interviews to start with questions such as "Tell me about yourself," and I know you've already touched on that, Ruth. So be prepared for that. We've touched on another introductory question would be what do you know about the company. Just look up a few simple key facts, like when they were formed, where their main business operates out of, how big their team is. It doesn't have to be anything over the top, but these things get the conversation started. Maybe mention you've seen about their apprentice program, what they're doing with them. You've seen some great stories about it, so these things I think can generate really good conversations to begin with. What I would also say as well, at the end, last impressions are as important as first impressions, and I know you touched on it with have questions prepared. Don't be afraid to have them written down. And people, shows you're organized. So yeah, just ask about career opportunities, different things like that. So yeah, focus on your first impression and your lasting impression is what I would always say to people.
That's brilliant, Jenny. Thank you so much for that. Anything else before we move on to my top tips that you wanted to share?
No, what I would just say is be prepared. Take a bit, as I said already, sometimes we aren't the best culturally at bigging ourselves up. So spend some time with yourself, during this process before you start the interviews. Maybe jot down, everything that you've done. You might be surprised about, with like part-time jobs, hobbies, exams, you might be surprised what you've achieved already, and just kind of get comfortable with talking about yourself and know about yourself, because sometimes you go into interviews and people, as you said before, they ask you a question about yourself and you almost freeze So, do that work beforehand, write it down tonight, and be ready to go with it. And because the interviewer genuinely wants to learn about you.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
Thanks, Jenny. Thank you so much for taking the time to join.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. Hopefully that was helpful in showing what both sides of the table, some tips from both sides of the interview table look like. I'm just going to share my screen again. Let me just, there we go. So we're going to finish up now just doing a little bit of a recap of my top tips of interview for before, during, and after. So hopefully this will sum up everything that you have already heard. Okay, so top tips before the interview. Do your research on the company. Remember, you don't need to spend hours doing this, but you should know enough to be able to answer a question about the company or even bring it into why you want to work for them. It's a good idea to read over, as Lucy said, read over your application, as interviewers may ask you to elaborate with something that you've written in there. If it is your first time going for the company, the best thing you can do is make sure you Google map it beforehand, make sure you know how to get there. And even if you are using public transport, find the best times that work for you for the start of your interview. And I know I'm pointing out the obvious here, but remember to add in how long it will take you to walk from the bus or the train. If you are running late for any reason, please ring ahead and leave a message for the interviewer to tell them that you're going to be late. My pet hate as an interviewer was always if people arrived late. They didn't ring ahead, didn't let us know they were going to be late, and some didn't even acknowledge the fact that they were late when they arrived. So that's just something to keep in mind. Practice the questions that we talked about today. Practice using the STAR method for different situational questions. And as Katie said, get parents or friends to even ask you some of these questions so you can practice with them. During the interview then, we've already covered this, but be aware of your body language. Make eye contact. Try not to fidget too much in your chair. Sit up, not back on your chair, okay? Keep your arms on cross, because believe it or not, psychologists tell us that if you cross your arms, that actually is a sign you're being defensive. So try to keep maybe your arms or your hands clasped on your lap. Try to keep your body language open. Remember, the interviewers are willing you to do well, and hopefully that's come out of today. So try to stay calm and be confident in yourself. If I'm nervous about something, I tell myself, just pretend you're confident. And genuinely, it sounds ridiculous, but it really does help. Pretend you're confident. Sit up straight, smile, have open body language, and just tell yourself you've got this. Don't forget, use the STAR technique to help you stay on track. Feel free to use even the words situation, task, action, and result throughout your answer. That's absolutely fine. And lastly, during your interview, Katie kind of touched on this. If you have a moment where maybe you don't understand the question or you maybe didn't hear it properly, never be afraid to ask them to repeat the question or ask them to go back and maybe clarify something that you didn't understand. Employers would far rather you do that than waffle and answer. And as Katie said, if you think of something after, feel free just to say, can I just go back and elaborate on that last answer? And then lastly, after the interview, have a question prepared about the company or about the job. And if you aren't successful in getting a job offer, never be afraid to ask for feedback. Most employers only give feedback if somebody asks them for it. So don't be afraid to do this, because it does really help you prepare for your next interview to know what you could have done better. And lastly, we all know about that Cinderella story about that prince trying to find whose fit perfectly fits the glass slipper. And that's a little bit like interviews. It's about finding the best fit for you as well as a company. Interviews are as much for you to decide if you want to work there as the company trying to find their next employee. If you do face rejection, that's okay. Chances are you wouldn't have been a good fit for the company, and you're far better off continuing your search to find something that does fit you and your skills and your qualities. We're going to move on to the last slide. I'm going to put this up here. Please, we would love to hear your thoughts. Remember, I am going to have time. We're going to go through the Q&A session in a wee minute, but we would absolutely love to hear your thoughts. We were blown away with the amount of people that signed up for this clinic, and we want to make sure that it was helpful. And if we need to make any changes for next time, please, we would love to know that. So please scan the QR code with your phones. It's a very quick survey. It takes less than 10. It's less than 10 questions. I think there's about 7 or 8. Most of them are multiple choice. So please take the time to fill that out. As you're doing that, I want to just say a big thank you to Jenny and Katie today. And Lucy, I'll maybe hand over to you if you wouldn't mind checking to see if there's any questions.
Great, thanks, Ruth. There is just 1 or 2 questions through at the minute. There are a couple that I was able to answer during the webinar.
Oh,
So,
great.
Ruth, one question is, should you ever ask about the salary at an interview?
Jenny, I'll maybe give you that one if that's okay.
I have a feeling that was coming my way. Do you know what? I mean, I'm not as caught up in that maybe as some people might be. At the end of the day, I think it's important to know. I think as a recruiter, we generally ask that question before interview so that we all know that we're on the same page. Does that make sense? Because it can be an incredible waste of the candidates and the interviewing managers' time if you haven't already had that conversation. So I personally think it's a really important one before the interview. And I guess if the interviewer hasn't asked you that question, maybe it is okay to ask because maybe it's not the right role for you if it doesn't align with your expectations. That would be my advice. I don't know if it's the right advice, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think most employers will share the salary at some stage even before interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in organizations where it's 5 interviews. I mean, you could get to the 5th interview and then, salaries are not aligned. I just think it's important that we do have that two-way conversation so that we can make decisions, early on.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, for me, with my interviews, once if they call you, if they accept you, that it came through like a contract with the salary. So I found out what the salary was for each role that I was, you know what I mean? Like what I applied for or whatever, like
Yeah.
after the interview. So
After the interview, yeah.
that's that was my
the way the
experience. It might be different now, but
the apprenticeship programs. I mean, yeah, maybe, yeah, it's yeah, I think it's important early doors, but yeah, sorry, it might not be the right answer.
No, I think both of them are really helpful points.
And I think people should be comfortable speaking about it as well. It's
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Brilliant. Okay. The next question I know the answer to, so I'll maybe answer that. So there's a question about TransLink. TransLink, the employer, they have sent everybody an aptitude test. So not no one's been invited by TransLink for interview just at this stage. They are doing the first step, which is their own specific aptitude test, and then they'll enter into the interview stage after that. So that's how TransLink's doing things. There's also a question about applying to the college course now before you're offered a position. You'll maybe remember me saying at the beginning that for an apprenticeship, you need the job position and you also need the college place, the training provider. And for most colleges, for most of the further educational colleges or the private training providers, you can apply now. But for Ulster University, they don't accept applications for the course until you have a job offer. So it depends which apprenticeship you've applied to, and it depends which apprenticeship you've got an interview for, and what the timeline is the best to do that. So that's those questions hopefully answered. There's also a question about whether or not this session will be recorded. Yes, it will. It's being recorded now and it will be posted on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And we know there's a lot of information in this webinar. It's been great to hear from apprentices and employers, and lots of advice and top tips from Ruth. So you can catch that on YouTube in the next couple of days. We'll try to get it uploaded as soon as possible. Ruth, there's a question about handshakes. So someone's asking, should you initiate a handshake when going into an interview?
Good question. Good question. It's completely up to you and what you're comfortable with. I would personally, I think handshakes show that you're professional, that you are confident, even if you don't feel like it. I would also potentially take the lead from the employer. Some employers will initiate a handshake. Um, my advice is if you walk into a room and there's a panel and the interviewer shows you the chair and says, this is for you, then I would just take a seat. If you walk into a room and you want to take the lead, then reach across the table and shake everybody's hand and introduce yourself. I think personally that shows a wee bit of confidence, but maybe Jenny and Katie, if you have any views on that or think differently, but I do think a handshake shows you're professional, and I do think it's worth. I don't think you lose anything by shaking someone's hand.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ruth. I think I would go on the employer's lead, but I wouldn't overthink if you took the lead yourself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say the same.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else, Lucy?
Brilliant. Maybe last question just is in
Sorry,
terms.
Lucy, I'm going to share my screen with the QR code while we answer that, just in case anyone missed
Perfect.
it, but keep going.
Perfect. The last question here, and then there's a couple of others that can type the answers to, or you can watch back the recording, where we covered. There's a question about clothing, for example, and we covered that at the beginning, and also there's a question about, have employers already sent interviews? We've covered that at the beginning too. So the last question that we'll go with is, at what point is bigging yourself up seeming like boasting? Which is a good question.
It's a good Northern Ireland way of thinking there, potentially. I think you should be confident. I think it's okay to big yourself up. I think actually interviews are the place that's the place for you to do that. You want to make your best qualities shine through. You want to be honest and let your personality shine through. And I think it's okay to list your achievements. You can still be humble at the same time as what you talk as you talk about what you've achieved. But I think it is really important to get across what you've achieved and what you're proud of. Again, gonna pass over to Jenny and Katie if they have any other thoughts on that.
I completely agree with you, Ruth. I think it's important to speak highly of what you've achieved and what you've done. What I would steer away from, and I think I touched on it as well, is maybe comparing it to others, so you might want to say how well you've done in an exam, but maybe saying, oh, everybody else in the class didn't, they all it might not look as, well. So just keep the focus on yourself and how proud you are of your own personal achievement, in a kind of humble, kind, considerate way.
Thanks. Katie, have you anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say the same. Just don't hold back and just say what you're gonna say. But obviously you can do it in a humble way and not be. I wouldn't say you're being boastful by they're asking you, so you're telling them kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Great.